Good afternoon. Welcome to Analogize Class 2 on grape varieties on today, November 11th. Welcome to Chuck as well as Alan viewing the recording here in the Analogize classroom. Really excited for today's class. Some great content on the main grape varieties. So let's take a look at what we'll cover today. So after today's class, we'll be able to describe or define what a grape variety is. And understand the top characteristics, the main characteristics of the four principal white grape varieties and the four principal red or black grape varieties. And then at the end, just a little slight peek into other important white and red grape varieties. So from last week, if you recall, Chuck and Alan, we covered wine appreciation, kind of the 6 S's, the UC Davis aroma wheel. We looked at grape growing, terroir, vineyard calendar. We took a look at winemaking, including fermentation and oak and other concepts. So hopefully that's clear. Please do reach out if you have any questions on that content moving forward. And for today, were you aware, did you know that Cabernet Sauvignon was a spontaneous natural crossing between Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc in the Bordeaux vineyards in the 18th century? And would you like to know which grape variety naturally tastes like chocolate? And importantly, how do you pronounce this grape variety here? So we'll take a look at all of that in the next hour and a half. So what is a grape variety? So a grape variety is also known as a vine variety, or to the science community, a cultivar. Many grape varieties we're aware of: Chardonnay, Riesling, Merlot, and it's actually a subspecies of Vitis vinifera. So imagine different dog breeds. They're all the same species, but just like grape varieties, which are the same species of, or all subspecies of Vitis vinifera, just like dogs, they have different characteristics, and they look and act and seem different. And grape varieties are essentially the same thing, which fall under this Vitis vinifera species. So we'll take a look in order at 4 top grape varieties: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc. We'll look at Riesling and Pinot Gris, with a few questions interspersed into this content. So starting with Chardonnay. Just a little overview. It's the world's most planted white wine grape variety. For many years, it was the largest quality white wine grape variety. There was a widely planted Spanish grape variety in the central plateau of Spain that was very low, average quality. And Chardonnay has taken over more plantings worldwide. So it's the #1 planted white wine grape. I believe it's number 3 worldwide, behind Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And sometimes it's mistaken for a region or a brand. Sometimes people, there was a saying that Chardonnay was basically North American for white wine for a few years. In the 90s, it was extremely popular, or early to mid 2000s as well. So a little bit of confusion, but just like all the other grape varieties, it is a vine subspecies, a cultivar, a grape variety. And it's highly adaptable to both its terroir and the winemaking techniques. So we talked a little bit about malolactic conversion, malolactic fermentation last week. We'll talk about it a little bit more on this grape variety, as well as oak aging, lees stirring, and other winemaking techniques. And it's a white wine that, because it's a little bit fuller in alcohol, and especially in a warmer climate, and it takes well to oak aging and some of these weight-enhancing winemaking techniques like lees stirring or malolactic fermentation or oak aging, pairs great with heavier foods. So butter lobsters is classic. If somebody was usually a white wine drinker, and you wanted to pair a white wine with a food that was fuller bodied, Chardonnay would fit the bill for that fuller style that might normally require red wine, but Chardonnay can fill in as a white wine. So this infographic is something I developed based on Madeleine Pouquet's. She had a similar infographic, and so I've kind of expanded on that. So these flavor characteristics that we see here are what I find Chardonnays tend to express. And remember that Chardonnay is very transparent of its terroir. So in a cool climate where the vines are less ripe, the grapes are less ripe, it tends to produce lemon, green apple, perhaps pear. You know, in a moderate climate, maybe peach and maybe melon. And then in a warmer climate, you'll get more ripe aromas such as melon, banana, pineapple from the Chardonnay grapes. So it kind of spans the gamut from somewhere like Chablis or let's say Prince Edward County, which will really be high in that lemon and green apple and pear, or warm climates like California, Australia, which will be more into the ripe categories. With oak, which Chardonnay can often be oaked or unoaked. Generally, if it doesn't say, it's usually lightly oaked or more oaked. You can often tell by the tasting note. So if you're able to pull up a wine critic's tasting note on a Chardonnay, it may give you clues if there's vanilla or clove or toast, or some of the butterscotch, sour cream from the malolactic fermentation. The oak and malolactic fermentation often go hand in hand, and you can get some clues from the tasting note as if it was oak aged or with oak chips or oak staves in your wine. Aging the Chardonnay wine in an oak barrel will add body, as well as flavors of vanilla, toast, and baking spices, clove, nutmeg, just like we saw last week. And malolactic fermentation, in addition to adding that butterscotch, sour cream, malolactic fermentation is a bacterial conversion, essentially, of malic acid, which is the same acid you find in a green apple, malic acid, and it converts that mallow acid into lactic acid, which is a milk or butter acid. So it's a second fermentation that some wines undergo. Some white wines that you want to preserve the acidity won't do malolactic conversion. They'll preserve that high malic acid. And some wines and many Chardonnays will do the malolactic conversion, malolactic fermentation, and get that butterscotch, sour cream, buttered toast or popcorn. Buttered popcorn is a common characteristic for some oak age Chardonnays. So for each of these grape varieties, we'll talk about the principal regions that produce them. And again, Chardonnay is grown worldwide, number one white grape variety. But these are the top regions, or at least the classic regions that you'll find Chardonnay. And of course, you find it in almost every wine growing region throughout the world. So its perhaps best expressions, arguably, are in the Côte d'Or, which is the northern slopes, east-facing slopes of northern Burgundy, just south of Dijon, between Dijon and Lyon in France. And also part of Burgundy, and a little bit further north, quite a bit closer to Paris, is a region called Chablis, and this is typically unoaked Chardonnay, producing really restrained mineral, balanced, more in that lemon, tart, green apple style, unoaked Chardonnay from Chablis. Champagne is planted to about 30% Chardonnay, as well as two black grape varieties, so Blanc de Blanc, meaning white wine from white grapes in Champagne, is always 100% Chardonnay, being the only grape variety there. Canada produces some great Chardonnays. Do I have a slide? I don't. There's an awesome event every year. I think it's in its 9th or 10th year coming up next July, called I4C. Type that in. So I4C stands for International Cool Climate Chardonnay Celebration. So Cool Climate Chardonnay Celebration, I4C. And it celebrates Chardonnay from all over the world, from Ontario, of course, from Canada, British Columbia, Quebec, Nova Scotia, from Champagne and Burgundy. We have producers from Australia. We have winemakers from California and New Zealand, South Africa, all over the world come to Niagara region, and I believe the fourth weekend of July every year. And it's a great event to taste world Chardonnays, learn about different professionals, masters of wine, master sommeliers, come and speak. Major wine authors come and speak to in the School of Cool, and there's great tastings. There's a dinner on the Saturday night. It's a really fun event. Highly recommend checking that out if you're interested in Chardonnay and wine and wine education as well. California as well as Australia produce a number of Chardonnays, and again, they have warmer pockets and cooler pockets and moderate range regions in both these countries, and the Chardonnay will express accordingly in each of those cool, moderate, or warm parts of those countries. Chile producing some excellent value Chardonnay, especially in the cooler Pacific moderated zones. We'll learn more about Chile and all these New World countries in week 4. New Zealand, especially in Marlborough in the North Island, and quite a few other regions like Gisborne and Hawke's Bay producing some fantastic cool or moderate climate Chardonnay, as well as for sparkling wine in New Zealand. And South Africa, same thing. Some great Benguela Current is the name of the cool oceanic current that moderates the coastal South African climate. So some great coastal Chardonnay in South Africa, thanks to that cool Benguela current. Type that in here. Benguela. So these are some of the typical kind of benchmark examples. So just certain producers, but principally the regions that these come from. So for Chardonnay, kind of oaked and unoaked examples, and for oaked, Pouligny Montrachet, as well as neighboring Chassagne Montrachet, and neighboring Meursault. These are classic old world oaked Chardonnays, new French oak, balanced, so they will have that butterscotch, toast, vanilla, clove, hazelnut, really complex savory aromas, beautiful balance, great with escargot, great with lobster and seafood, and quite a few dishes as well. From Old World unoaked, benchmarks from unoaked, I'd say a Chablis Premier Cru. Chablis, of course, again, is the unoaked, principally unoaked Chardonnay. Region of northern Burgundy, actually quite a bit closer to Champagne and Paris, in fact. And Premier Cru is a classification indicating first qualified growth. There's an even higher level of classified vineyards called Grand Cru, great growth. But Chablis Premier Cru will have that concentration of flavor, that elegance, that balance, again, pairing great with food, seafood, various dishes. And some good example values if you're looking for more approachable. Pouligny Montrachet can run in the close to $100 per bottle. Chablis Premier Cru is good value, again, maybe $30 or $40, $45 in our Ontario market. But some good value examples of that really overly oaked style, still nicely balanced, was the Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve, available at most LCBO vintages. And for unoaked, I would say this producer here, La Chablisienne, is a cooperative from the region of Chablis and producing some fantastic examples of unoaked Chardonnay. And I believe this bottle here is $27 or $28 for the bottle. So if you have the Sauvignon Blanc, if you're tasting along at home, fantastic. I believe we have the Babbage Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. So as we transition into the second grape variety, Sauvignon Blanc, and if you're tasting along at home, try and see if you can pick out what's described as an herbaceous character. Think fresh cut grass or green bell pepper, sometimes asparagus or canned peas, different kind of green vegetables, green grass kind of aromas to many Sauvignon Blancs. And I believe this Babbage has a nice example of that fresh cut grass or bell pepper character. And don't forget the 6 S's, right? So see, swirl, sniff, sip, swish, and savor for your Sauvignon Blanc. So Sauvignon Blanc, again, has a telltale herbaceous note more often than not, especially in the higher price, which are more expressive. Typically, $15 to $25 range wines tend to express their flavors more succinctly, more accurately. Tends to be high acid, so that crisp, refreshing, saliva-inducing freshness to it. And generally is best consumed in its youth. There are some great examples of Sauvignon Blanc from Bordeaux, which is blended with another grape variety, Semillon. And those can be oaked, and those can age for 4 to 6 years beautifully. But most Sauvignon Blanc, especially varietal Sauvignon Blanc, is best on its own and best at an early stage in its youth. So aromas to Sauvignon Blanc tend to be fairly similar. Again, you get that herbaceous, fresh-cut grass, maybe a yellow lemon character. Gooseberry is a common descriptor, especially for New Zealand, cool climate, refreshing New Zealand-style Sauvignon Blanc. And peach, maybe more moderate climate. And then if they do a little bit fuller, riper style, you might get tropical fruit like mango and papaya or passion fruit, some really tropical aromas. It's really interesting in New Zealand. A common winemaking technique is to harvest a third of the crop prior to maturity, so a little bit underdeveloped, maybe more that high acid citrus character, gooseberry as well, and then they'll harvest a third of the crop at maturity, getting that peach and maybe apple or pear character, but certainly peach, and then harvest a third of the crop super mature, so past maturity, getting that tropical passion fruit, mango, papaya, and then they'll ferment each of those three lots and blend them together to make the ideal New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. It's a very common technique in New Zealand, and a big reason for that country's fame and success with this variety in the last 20 years. And a style now being reproduced even in France and many Sauvignon Blanc producing regions throughout the world. Some of these regions in France include Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. These are two classic Sauvignon Blanc regions from central Loire, from inland Loire Valley. The Loire is the longest river in France, and it traverses north all the way up to Orléans and then out west towards the Atlantic. And just before it turns west at Orléans, flowing downstream, you have two regions of Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. Excuse me. And these are restrained in style, high acid, great with food, phenomenal with chèvre, goat cheese, or especially Loire Valley goat cheese. And many foods they pair beautifully with. Summer salad, it actually pairs quite well. Usually tough to pair a wine with vinaigrette and salad and greens and leafy greens, but these two wines actually go relatively well. As mentioned, Bordeaux is blending Sauvignon Blanc with Semillon, as well as producing quite a large amount of varietal Sauvignon Blanc in what's called Entre deux Mers. Type that in. Entre deux Mers. So this is the region of Bordeaux between the two seas, between the two major rivers that join up to form the Gironde estuary. And so the Garonne and the Dordogne, before they join up, the between the two seas section east of the village of Bordeaux, the city of Bordeaux. And in Entre deux Mers, they produce a large amount of varietal Sauvignon Blanc, very good quality for the price, very good value. Marlborough, of course, is perhaps the iconic region, certainly now, since the 70s and 80s, once they sprung into relative recent fame and high quality production. So Marlborough's in the northern part of the South Island of New Zealand and producing iconic Sauvignon Blancs. Sauvignon Blancs, I believe, represents 70% of New Zealand plantings. So is most of it in Marlborough, but is found throughout the island, the country, sorry. South Africa, as well as Chile, producing some excellent quality value Sauvignon Blancs, and even some middle to upper quality Sauvignon Blanc from their cooler coastal regions. And California as well has some quite a bit of planting of Sauvignon Blanc, not as much as Chardonnay in California, but some really good quality, a little bit more fruit forward, more in that peach and mango and papaya ripeness level, generally speaking. And you can also find Fumé Blanc, which is a playoff Pouilly-Fumé, but Fumé Blanc in California can be oaked or unoaked, but represents the Sauvignon Blanc style from California. And so here we have a couple of benchmarks. Sancerre, of course, being the traditional example of high quality benchmark Sauvignon Blanc. And this is the Black Label Babbage Sauvignon Blanc. Beautiful, complex, mineral, balanced, interesting Sauvignon Blanc, similar to the Babbage White Label, which you may have in front of you now. And this more modern style. So again, that kind of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 blending of each of these ranges of ripeness, giving a range of fruit flavors. So great. If I'm going to pull up the poll, hopefully it transfers over into the recording. But I'll read out the questions, and I'll give you a moment to think about each of the questions. So hopefully you can see this at the recording at home, but I'll read it out. So the first question on our poll is true or false? Chardonnay is highly malleable, taking on characteristics of its terroir and winemaking. I'll give you a moment to think about that. So true or false, Chardonnay is highly malleable, taking on characteristics of its terroir and winemaking. So if you guessed it, it is true, absolutely. So both are highly malleable and influenced in the terroir and winemaking. Question number 2 from this first section is, if you smell fresh cut grass aromas in your wine, in your white wine, you probably have A, Chardonnay, B, a Sauvignon Blanc, C, a Riesling, or D, a Pinot Gris. So if you smell fresh cut grass aromas in your white wine, you probably have a Sauvignon Blanc, of course. One of the only white varieties, certainly out of these major varieties, that that produces an herbaceous fresh cut grass aroma. Okay, so we'll carry on with our next 2 white grape varieties. Our next one is Riesling, which is a beautiful grape variety, kind of the sommelier's darling. Many sommeliers love Riesling. Many wine people love Riesling. Wine educators, wine students, wine writers, just people that like wine more often than not have an affinity towards Riesling wines. Because they're light in alcohol, really refreshing, that high acidity to almost all Rieslings. And they have a lot of flavor concentration, what's called extract. So a lot of extract in Riesling wines. And this extract gives more flavor on the mid palate especially, and on the finish as you taste and swallow and savor the wine. And it also allows it to age extremely well. So the high acid and all that flavor ages beautifully for many good quality Riesling wines. They come in a range of styles from Alsatian bone dry and many New World bone dry styles. German bone dry Riesling wines. There's a number of medium sweet from the New World, from Germany and many countries. And then lusciously sweet if it's an ice wine, for example, or a botrytis affected. This is a type of noble rot, a mold that affects the grapes very positively by raisinating and concentrating the flavors of the Riesling wines. Or this mold, noble rot, affects other grape varieties as well. But you can get, in addition to ice wine, you can get noble rot dessert wine. Sauterne would be an example of a noble rot white wine based on Sauvignon Blanc Semillon from Bordeaux. But in Germany and Austria, there are a number of botrytis-affected Riesling dessert wines. Germany, of course, produces the most and the best Riesling wines on the whole. And Alsace is also phenomenal. Alsace is, of course, on the border of Germany, but part of France, between the Vosges Mountains and the Rhine River, and producing some great dry style. Almost all Alsatian Rieslings are dry and very rich in flavor, and great with food as well. Classic characteristics to Riesling wines are lemon and lime, that high acid citrus note, green apple. If there's even a medium amount of sweetness, they can often have a canned pear aroma, taste to them, kind of that Del Monte fruit cup pear kind of thing. The ever discussed minerality is very common in good quality Rieslings, especially from Mosel or Rheingau or Alsace. Many German, from many Austrian Rieslings have a mineral component. And mineral, if you're not familiar with the term, it's kind of a crushed rock, wet stone. If you picture the smell of rain on hot cement in the summer, or pouring water on the hot rocks in the sauna, is kind of that wet rock mineral aroma. And of course, the very unique, characterful petrol descriptor for Rieslings, which as Riesling wines age, there's a wonderful, natural, healthy and clean aroma of what's described as petrol, which is kind of a euphemism for almost a kerosene kind of aroma. It can also appear as kind of freshly opened can of tennis balls has this petrol aroma, kind of a fresh rubber petrol aroma. And Riesling wines, typically as they age, will take on this savory petrol, as well as other characters like nuts and honey, and really a complex bouquet of beautiful aromas. So as mentioned, Moselle and Rheingau, many regions like the Pfalz and other regions in Germany produce phenomenal, the best German wines. We'll see some good examples on the next slide. Alsace in northern France, Austria, predominantly in the Niederösterreich, the Lower Austria province in eastern Austria. Ontario producing some phenomenal value, phenomenal quality Riesling, some of the best in the world, in fact, widely available to the Ontario market at many LCBO stores. Australia is a key producer, especially from the Eden and Clare Valleys in southern Australia towards Adelaide, very close to Barossa Valley, in fact. Washington State almost seems an unlikely candidate for Riesling for a couple reasons. In Washington State, many of us think of the Puget Sound and rainy Seattle, but only about 1% of Washington's grapes are grown west of the Cascade Mountains. 99, the vast majority of production in Washington State is east in the lee side, the dry desert side of these Cascade Mountain range. And some excellent quality Riesling, typically dry Riesling, sometimes off-dry dessert Rieslings as well from Washington State. And Finger Lakes as well, not too far of a drive from Ontario, anywhere in Ontario, and producing some fantastic quality Rieslings. Producers like Weimer, as well as Dr. Frank, and many other great quality producers. Again, a similar kind of terroir to what we see in Ontario, which is producing some very high quality, mineral driven, and complex and balanced Riesling wines. So benchmarks for that medium style of Riesling would be from the village of Bernkastel. So a New Yorker is from New York, for example, and a wine from Bernkastel is called Bernkasteller, as in New Yorker, Bernkasteller. And there are many sites that this vineyard site in Bernkastel is said to have been cultivated by a monastic doctor during the Black Plague in the Middle Ages. And it was said that there was a noble king or prince arrived ill to this vigneron, and he gave him some of the Bernkasteller doctor from this vineyard site in the Moselle Valley in Germany, and cured the king from his illness. So this is the Doctor Vineyard from Bernkastel, and a medium dry or medium sweet style Riesling from Germany. This is a Taz Riesling ice wine, one of the most complex, if not the most complex, ice wines you can get. And this is an excellent value, excellent quality, phenomenal quality dessert style made from frozen grapes. The grapes are left on the vine, ripen throughout the growing season, and then the Riesling grapes freeze in December, sometimes January or February, and are harvested at -8 or -10 degrees Celsius in the middle of the night, and separated, pressed off that frozen liquid, those ice crystals, and the concentrated sugar as well as acid and flavor are then fermented and converted into delicious dessert ice wine. Great in a cocktail, great with foie gras or blue cheese or nuts or dried fruit. Fruit tarts go really well with ice wine. And an excellent style, excellent quality example for a good value, I think less than $15 or so in Ontario, is the Wilm Riesling from Alsace. And many other examples from Alsace. This one, I believe, is regularly available. So shifting into Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. This is a single grape variety with different names. So in French regions, it's labeled as Pinot Gris, its French name. And in Italian regions, where it's also widely grown, it's labeled as Pinot Grigio. Same grape variety. And in different regions throughout the world, whichever style they're going for, whether it's the French Pinot Gris style or the Italian Pinot Grigio style, which we'll discuss. These other world regions may often label it based on the style that they're trying to replicate, trying to produce the wine in. So Pinot Gris is a mutation of Pinot Noir. So at some point in Pinot Noir's long genealogy, it's morphed, it's mutated into this gray-skinned grape variety, as opposed to Pinot Noir's black-skinned. And both Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio often smell of grapes and flowers, really lovely floral component. And I listed, as when I was doing the research for this presentation, I came up with the term red ribbon darling, because to me Pinot Gris is rarely the most planted grape variety, or the one you think of the most in many regions. And I'll give some examples, but it's often the second most, or perhaps the next most after the major varieties you would think of. So for example, New Zealand, we think, of course, of Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay is quite popular in New Zealand. And then Pinot Gris is the third most planted, that you don't really hear about, though. Or in Oregon, Pinot Noir represents about 60 or 70% of plantings, and then 10 or 15%, the next most planted, is Pinot Gris. British Columbia, Australia has a large amount of Pinot Gris, just behind Chardonnay, which would be its most well-known and most widely planted white grape variety. So kind of a red ribbon darling. In the Pinot Gris style, so the French Alsatian style, it tends to have also that grapey and floral aroma, but sometimes a melon or perhaps more ripe style, and tends to be fuller bodied with lower acidity and almost oily or perhaps viscous on the palate. So making it a great food partner. And in Italy, it's produced as Pinot Grigio, which tends to be more lemon, high acid, fresh, and quite lightly flavored, almost neutral in style. It's grown in very high crop loads. We talked about yields last week, where there'd be a large yield, a large amount of grapes coming from a same size of land, typically for these Pinot Grigio Italian wines. There are a number of great examples in Italy, and we'll see one on the next slide. But most of it is fairly neutral Pinot Grigio. So where does Pinot Gris come from? Of course, Alsace we talked about. Germany is another large principal producer of this variety. Again, it's grown in so many countries, kind of the next most popular grape variety. Oregon I'd mentioned, New Zealand I'd mentioned, producing some excellent Pinot Gris. Some of the best Pinot Gris you can taste comes from Oregon, as well as British Columbia, producing some fantastic kind of in that Pacific Northwest cluster, including British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, producing regions. Pinot Grigio from Northeast Italy, principally Veneto, but also Trentino Alto Adige and Friuli Venezia Giulia, these northeastern regions. And Pinot Grigio was mimicked from California producers, Ontario producers, Australia, Chilean, many producers producing this light, easy drinking, widely demanded, highly popular Pinot Grigio style. Excuse me. So benchmarks for the Alsatian Pinot Gris style and for Friuli Pinot Grigio. This is the producer Hermann German, which is located in Friuli, Venezia Giulia. And this is one of the more flavorful, richly textured Pinot Grigio styles. So I'll pull up the poll. One question from section 2, if you can see it there on your screen. The famous wine from Bernkastel, Germany, is called A. Bernkasteller Doctor, B. Blue Nun, or C. Bernkasteller Dentist. And of course, as mentioned, Bernkasteller Doctor. This is one of the benchmark, one of the iconic, expensive, high quality, perhaps the top expression of Riesling available. So we'll take just a 5-minute break. I'll pause the video there, and we'll come back with red grape varieties, looking at Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Syrah Shiraz. So we'll check back in just a moment. Okay, so welcome back. Thank you for being with me here today for Enologize Class 2 grape varieties. We've looked at white grape varieties, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, and Pinot Grigio. And for the second half, we're going to cover the 4 principal red grape varieties in order: Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Syrah Shiraz. So starting with the king of grapes, the grape of kings, to quote a oft-used saying, the Cabernet Sauvignon is the world's most planted grape variety, producing very long-lived wines. It's got high tannins, high acidity, and quite a bit of that flavor concentration I'd mentioned with Riesling. So between the structure of high acid and high tannins, or medium high at least, and all that flavor concentration, producing some very long-lived, age-worthy, complex wines where those flavors of black fruit and black currant, plum, and cherry evolve into very complex, savory, enjoyed bouquet aromas. It won't ripen in a cool climate, so it needs at least a moderate climate or warm climate, or very warm year in a cool climate. One of the miracles of Cabernet Sauvignon, I believe, is that it produces a wine that's pretty much Cabernet at almost all price points. So there's many grape varieties that at lower price points, it loses all of its varietal character. The characteristics, the typicity, the typical characters that you would expect from many grape varieties. But Cabernet, even for Central Valley, irrigated, high nutrient-rich soils, producing large yields of fairly average wines for $8 or $9 locally, still actually pretty much tastes like a Cabernet Sauvignon. You do get a lot more expressiveness, concentration, longer finish, and pleasantness with high-quality Cabernet Sauvignons. And I'm preparing a lesson for Enologize on quality and how you can pick it out and what it means in wines. So stay tuned for that. But even at the entry price point level, it's still pretty much recognizably Cabernet. So here are some of the flavors here. Black currant is a classic characteristic. Currant's kind of a small raisin type fruit, but a different fruit than a grape. Often, classically, Cabernet Sauvignon will have a black currant character, as well as cedar and perhaps dark cherry. With oak, which Cabernet Sauvignon lends itself very well to being oak-aged, because that will soften those tannins and also add complementary flavors of toast, coffee, vanilla, and perhaps some baking spices as well. Bottle aging an age-worthy Cabernet Sauvignon will also have the same effect, soften those tannins, soften the acidity, and add these complex flavors of tobacco, cigar box, sandalwood, very extremely complex, rich, attractive, lovely aromas. I've kind of split this classic regions, for Cabernet Sauvignon into what I call top quality, including left bank Bordeaux. So in Bordeaux on the west coast, the Atlantic coast of France, again, you have those 2 major rivers flowing into the Gironde estuary. And on the left bank, so as you're flowing down the river, the left side, the south side, of the river, you have Cabernet Sauvignon dominated wines. These include villages like Margaux and Pauillac and Saint Estèphe, Saint Julien, as well as Grave and Pessac Léognan. And this is where the top chateau, the top classified chateau, produce Cabernet Sauvignon dominated blends, blended with Merlot and perhaps Cabernet Franc. Napa Valley could be said to be the second home to Cabernet Sauvignon, producing equally high quality from the top sites in this warm Mediterranean climate in northern California. And then we have what's called the Super Tuscans. If you've heard the term Super Tuscans, it indicates a wine that was produced in Tuscany from Cabernet Sauvignon and other grape varieties. And the reason they came up with the moniker Super Tuscan was that the quality was so high, but because they were using Cabernet Sauvignon and other grape varieties that weren't permitted in the appellation legislation, the wine laws for labeling wine laws, they had to label them as table wines, basic table wines, which were on average selling for, a couple of euros, 1 or 2 euros for a liter, and were very basic quality. But these high quality Super Tuscans didn't had the price maybe of $50 to $100 and the quality, but they couldn't be labeled DOC Toscana or DOC Chianti, for example, or Maremma. So they came up with the term in the 70s, Super Tuscans. And these represent some of the best Cabernet Sauvignon wines, base wines, in the world, as well as 2 regions in Australia, Coonawarra in southern Australia, kind of between Melbourne and Adelaide, as well as Western Australia, just south of Perth, in Margaret River, producing some great quality Cabernet Sauvignon wines. Chile could be said to be kind of Bordeaux's second home, producing great Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and other Bordeaux varieties. Washington State, again, on the east side of the Cascades, producing some very high quality, good value Cabernet Sauvignon wines, both varietal and blended. Sonoma, just west of Napa Valley, particularly in Alexander Valley and Knights Valley in kind of northeastern Sonoma, inland Sonoma. And southern British Columbia in the Osoyoos Valley, producing in the Okanagan Valley, southern Okanagan Valley, producing some great Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Sauvignon blends. So this is Left Bank Bordeaux for our Old World's benchmark. There are, just like we saw with Chablis a little bit, we'll talk about this next week during Old World Wines class, but there are Premier Cru and Grand Cru in Burgundy, Bourgogne, and in Bordeaux they have classified growths. First growth, Premier Cru Classé, Deuxième, Troisième, Quatrième, and Cinquième Cru Classé. And so obviously first growth Bordeaux is the top quality. These are very expensive, very high quality, age-worthy, almost demanding age to really come into its complex bouquet, its complex balanced bouquet with softer tannin, softer acidity, and just divine, sublime mouthfeel. Napa Valley producing some great, this is Stag's Leap Winery. Their Cabernet Sauvignon won the Judgment of Paris, which was a competition set in 1976 in Paris by Stephen Spurrier, a wine merchant and wine writer and educator in Paris. And he paired California's top Cabernet Sauvignons and Chardonnays against those of France. And turns out both for Chardonnay and for Cabernet Sauvignon, California came out on top against some of these first growth and Premier Cru and Grand Cru French wines. So Stag's Leap was the actual Cabernet Sauvignon, their 1974, I believe, vintage won over all the top French Cabernet Sauvignons. For a good value, the Torres Gran Coronas from northeastern Spain is another very good quality region for what's dubbed as international varieties, predominantly French varieties such as Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Others like Syrah and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. But Torres for $20 produces a very interesting, complex, enjoyable Cabernet Sauvignon wine. and many Chilean producers, notably Concha y Toro, one of the largest Chilean producers, producing some excellent value Cabernet Sauvignon. So again, if you have the Merlot at home at the moment, please taste that. And what I'd like you to think about, just an open-ended question, is what are your first impressions of this wine? So think about those impressions, and we'll talk a little bit about Merlot characteristics. So again, it's number 2 planted in the world. It tends to be fuller in bodied. It ripens a little bit earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon. So a little bit higher alcohol, a little bit more body and warmth and roundness on the palate. So it's very smooth, less tannins, less acidity than its stable-mate Cabernet Sauvignon. So very smooth, soft style wine. Blends with Cabernet both in the vineyard and in the vat. Because it ripens earlier, and in regions like Bordeaux where Cabernet may not ripen in some years, Merlot ripens those 2 weeks earlier, which can be crucial to get it off the vine and into the winery and produce a wine to have to sell. Whereas in some vintages the Cabernet may not ripen fully, and so you'd have to, as a farmer, you'd be hedging your bets. And they happen to blend really well together. Cabernet provides kind of that acidity and tannins and ageability, as well as some dark fruit flavors like black currant. And Merlot provides the softness and roundness and smoothness and chocolate and berry kind of red fruit flavors. So they blend very well and to make a complete wine. The aromas you'll get with Merlot, typically plum, dark cherry, perhaps chocolate, perhaps fruitcake if it ages a little bit, and with oak, coffee, and vanilla, and maybe some other sweet spices as well. So the main regions for Merlot is grown all throughout Bordeaux, especially in Entre-deux-Mers, as well as the left bank, but the top regions in Bordeaux are on the right bank. So again, following the rivers downstream around the village of Saint-Emilion and Libourne. Are some of the best, if not the best, Merlot dominant wines in the world. There's a lot of fairly average, widely large yield, widely planted Merlot in northern Italy, Veneto, as well as northern kind of in the Po plain, the Po River Valley. California, such as Napa Valley, Sonoma Valley, producing Central Valley as well, which is a high-yielding, inland, irrigated, large production zone of California. Washington State, again on the east side, we're in the Columbia Valley where Cabernet is planted. Some very good quality, very good value Merlot, often with that plummy, chocolatey prune flavors. Chile, again, top for Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Petit Verdot, Carmenere in Chile, these Bordeaux grape varieties. And a small region on the North Island in New Zealand called Hawke's Bay. They've got these really lovely gravel soils called gimlet gravels. I'll type that in. So those are the gimlet gravels. And just like in Bordeaux on the left bank where they produce excellent Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot blends on gravelly soils, Hawke's Bay has these very similar gravel soils producing great Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot as well. So here's a benchmark from Pomerol. This is a smaller village just west of Saint-Emilion on the right bank in Bordeaux. Napa Valley Duckhorn, one of the iconic producers of Merlot. And it may not be available at the moment, the Christian Mouix Merlot. He's a large negociant, a large producer, distributor of Bordeaux wines. And for $15 or $16, his Merlot in vintages was always one of the top quality expressions for a very good value. So I'll pull up 2 questions, one on Cabernet Sauvignon to start. It's a true or false. Cabernet Sauvignon's combination of structure, which is tannins and acidity, and flavor allows it to age wonderfully. True or false? So Cabernet Sauvignon's combination of structure and flavor allows it to age wonderfully. And so that generally is true. A low quality may not age very well, but because of the structure and the flavor concentration, it is true that that's what will allow it to age very well. And of these, question number 2, of these, which is typically the smoothest grape variety? A, Cabernet Sauvignon, B, Merlot, or C, Syrah? So if you've had a chance to think about it at home, it is Merlot, is typically the smoothest of the grape varieties, of the red grape varieties listed there. This may work better next week if you're in the class, if you can join us next week, Charles and Alan, hopefully. Carrying along with Pinot Noir. So this is truly a beautiful grape variety. The best can be sublimely divine. It's known as the heartbreak grape because it has very thin skins. So it's very difficult to grow. It's susceptible to mold, to rot, especially in rainy vintages. And even if you can grow beautiful fruit once you've harvested it, it's extremely difficult to vinify, to turn into a wine. So many people have tried, especially after being inspired by a Grand Cru or a Premier Cru classic Burgundy Pinot Noir, and failed, and some have succeeded. And I think it's from that inspiration from these old world Burgundy styles that makes people want to go back again and again after having their heart broken by trying to produce these ethereal, complex, delicious, sublime Pinot Noirs. It's most typically light-bodied, perhaps medium-bodied in a moderate climate, but it does require a cool or moderate climate. It rushes to ripeness, to over-ripeness very quickly, where the acidity can fall too fast in a warm climate, or even a warm vintage in a moderate climate. So light-bodied, lighter medium-bodied with light tannins. Again, the tannins are in the skins of the grapes, and it's got very thin skins. So light tannins and a pale color to virtually all Pinot Noirs. In a cool climate, you'll get tart cherry, some earthy. There's a picture of a barnyard here, and there's an expression in the wine industry, or just an expression in general, that says, good Pinot tastes like... I won't finish that, but it's true that Pinot Noir, especially many old world wines, but especially Pinot Noir, can have a really earthy kind of thing. Picture that as a euphemism for this really funky barnyard horse saddle kind of characteristic. And often it'll have mushroom aromas as well. In a moderate climate, again, it ripens very quickly, so perhaps a jammy strawberry nature, red cherry rather than tart cherry. Again, perhaps that earthy character. And if oaked, maybe a little bit of caramelization, oxidation to this Pinot Noir style. Classic regions, just like for Chardonnay, Bourgogne's Côte d'Or is classic for Pinot Noir, especially in the northern Côte de Nuit. Throughout all of Bourgogne, Pinot Noir is grown beautifully to greater or lesser extents. Champagne, of course, is 40%. The largest planted variety in Champagne is Pinot Noir, followed by Pinot Meunier and Chardonnay. Germany, they call it Spätburgunder. I'll type that in. I think there's an umlaut on the A. See if this comes up. Spätburgunder. Something like that. Burgunder, of course, because it's a Burgundian variety, and Spät meaning late. So this red grape variety ripens later than the other white grape varieties from Burgundy. So it's a Spätburgunder in Germany, and some great examples of that, perhaps with that mineral, earthy, barnyard, mushroom cherry style. Oregon reliably produces some of the best Pinot Noir. I've never been disappointed by an Oregon Pinot Noir, and sometimes hugely thrilled. New Zealand, especially in central Otago, most of New Zealand Pinot Noir production is in Marlborough, but there's a smaller region to the very far south. The southernmost growing point in the world is in South Island of New Zealand called Central Otago. And these are some excellent fruit-driven, balanced, complex, flavorful Pinot Noirs. Canada producing some excellent value Pinot Noir. The quality to price ratio is among the best in the world. Perhaps only Chile can do better to my taste. And California producing a lot of Pinot Noir as well, and some of the best coming from the cooler sites, perhaps in Santa Barbara, just north of Los Angeles, or coastal Carneros or coastal Sonoma, as well as Monterey in central California. Classic examples. This is a Burgundy here from the Romanée vineyard in Vaune Romanée, Domaine de la Romanée Conti. There's Argyle producer from Oregon, kind of a New World benchmark example. And a good quality, good value example from Chile, the Micas de la Mari, a northern region of Chile with limestone soils, producing very interesting Pinot Noir in this coastal influenced part of Chile. Okay, so moving on to our fourth red grape variety, Syrah Shiraz. Again, same grape variety with a different name, Syrah being its French origin and Shiraz being its Australian counterpart or doppelganger perhaps. So same grape variety, just like we saw with Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. In the other regions throughout the world that are producing a Syrah or Shiraz, they'll label it according to whichever style maybe they were destined to achieve through their climate or trying to achieve with their winemaking. Syrah tends to be a little bit more cooler climate, so a little bit more fresh. We'll take a look at the slide. But overall, Syrah is one of the most flavorful. It's very age-worthy. It's got higher tannins, high concentration of flavor and color, so very age-worthy. And in warm climate, where it's often labeled Shiraz, produce jammy, fruit-forward, ripe-style wines with soft, ripe tannins. And in a cooler, or perhaps let's call it a moderate climate, producing balanced Syrah, complex wines that are very food-friendly, especially with grilled game meats, or ribs or steak, that kind of meals. The characteristics of Syrah are blackberry, game meat, and black pepper. Again, if you picture being in a restaurant with the freshly cracked black pepper, this is a common aroma to Syrah, to moderate climate Syrah wines. The only other grape variety and there are a few, but apart from Syrah, the only regular one you'll get black pepper in is Gamay Noir. It tends to have a black pepper character. But most Syrahs will give you black pepper aromas. In a warm climate, that dark cherry character, blackberry jam, it's a really jammy, luscious style fruit character. And vanilla and toast, if they're oaked, which often they are. Sometimes even with American oak, which will give, again, that coconut and dill aromas. His homeland in the Rhone Valley, the river flowing through south of France, starting originally in Switzerland and flowing west down to turning south to flow out into the Mediterranean. And along its route in the northern Rhone, you have Hermitage and Côte Rôtie. These are very steep, south-facing. It's where the river bends east-west, and then the northern bank faces steep south, and it gets a lot of sunlight contact, producing very ripe, flavorful, age-worthy. These are iconic, age-worthy, delicious, heavenly Syrah wines from Hermitage and Côte Rôtie. In fact, the word Côte Rôtie, Côte means slopes, and Rôtie means roasted in French. So these are literally roasted, sun-baked, ripe, quality Syrah wines. The Southern Rhone also grows Syrah, but Grenache kind of Syrah plays second fiddle to Grenache, but adds a lot to the blend in a Southern Rhone GSM, Grenache Syrah Mourvèdre blend. which we also see this style of blend in Australia, Barossa Valley or McLaren Vale, as well as Hunter Valley and many other Western Australia as well. But in these very warm, iconic regions of Barossa and McLaren Vale, some very good quality Grenache, Syrah, which they call Shiraz, and sometimes blended with Mourvedre. Washington State is one of the top value examples for good quality Syrah, and they'll label it more often than not Syrah, but almost just as often Shiraz. South Africa, similar type high quality, high value style Syrah. And Chile, perhaps the most value, especially from Aconcagua, and again in northern Chile in Limari. Some interesting Pacific influence, cooler climate influence Syrah wines. So there's a expression from the hill of Hermitage in northern Rhone. The Grange is the iconic Syrah Shiraz wine produced by Penfolds in Barossa Valley. This is often one of the 100-point wines year after year, and one of the must-try wines on every sommelier's, every wine lover's bucket list should include the Grange. And I've included Killicanoon Shiraz from, I believe it's from McLaren Vale, as a good value example to taste, to see what the style is like. Perhaps not as concentrated as the Grange, but certainly in the same style. Okay, so our last poll of today's class. Just one question. It's a true or false. True or false, Pinot Noir's thick skins make it the heartbreak grape. Pinot Noir's thick skins make it the heartbreak grape. And for the detail-oriented amongst us, you may notice this is actually false, because yes, Pinot Noir is a heartbreak grape, but it's its thin skins that make it the heartbreak grape. So we'll call that false. And so just before kind of wrapping up for today's grape variety class, we'll talk just kind of a teaser for what's called other white grape varieties, other red grape varieties. I include a picture of the greasers from the novel and movie Outsiders. The greasers, of course, were the hometown boys that weren't as favored as the Socs, who are the social class in this novel. But the greasers had the heart and character, and were always the go-to guys that you're cheering for. And to me, kind of other white grape varieties, other red wines are in that essence, where Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Syrah, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Riesling, Pinot Gris, for example, Sauvignon Blanc to round them out, get a lot of fame, get a lot of attention, and for a long time they were the only grape varieties many consumers would taste. And the pendulum is starting to swing towards more alternate varieties or alternative varieties, other white grape varieties, other red grape varieties, which to me are kind of like the guys you're cheering for all along. So I'll just list a few of them. I'm in the idea phase of developing a wine 201 and perhaps a wine 301 down the road, where we'd explore these and other grape varieties, other regions, and learn a little bit more about this wonderful diversity and complexity of all these vine varieties that are out there. There's about 2,000, depending on which source is most accurate, 2,000 to 4,000 grape varieties, about 150 of which are commercial, and about 50 of which dominate the worldwide production of wine. So among some of these major grape varieties that are outside of the principal 8 we've looked at today, I've grouped the white grape varieties into aromatic and non-aromatic. So if you picture that kind of really, the tendency for the wine to really jump out of the glass, maybe floral or fruit aromas perhaps, but the aromatics include Muscat, which is actually a Muscat family. There's Muscat Blanc, a Petit Grain, as well as Muscat Alexandria, with many synonyms throughout, especially in the Mediterranean, where it's widely grown, Mediterranean basin, as well as Muscat Hautenel in some parts. Another variety is Viognier, grown in the north and southern Rhone, as well as regions of California, where we find the Rhone Rangers. Have you heard Rhone Rangers? These are wine producers who in the, I believe, 90s, 80s and 90s fell in love with Rhone varieties, including Viognier and Syrah Grenache. And Viognier was virtually just about extinct, actually. And the Rhone Rangers had started planting them and growing them and producing them in California, and were able to bring the demand, the awareness, and the demand to these great wines. This is the grape variety I mentioned at the beginning of class. The pronunciation is Gewürztraminer. So we talked about Bern Casteller, New Yorkers from New York. There's some history of this grape variety going back to the town of Tramin in northern German-speaking Italy, where the German word for spice is Gewürz, the first part of the word there, Gewürz. So this is the spicy wine from Tramin, Gewürztraminer. And difficult to pronounce, but delicious to drink. It pairs great with spicy Asian foods such as Thai, pad Thai, or Indian or curry dishes. Very, very good with a lovely Gewürztraminer. Perhaps best expression in Alsace, but quite a few different cooler climate regions produce great Gewürz. Torrontés is an aromatic grape variety from northern Argentina. Particularly in the province of Salta, Cafageti. This is at about 23 degrees latitude south, 23 degrees latitude south. So it's actually more equatorial than generally viable for viticulture. But these are in the foothills of the Andes. They're in the Andes mountain range at about 2,000 to 3,000 meters elevation. So that elevation moderates the temperature and cools this warm, otherwise tropical region, producing some great aromatic Torrontés. Non-aromatic varieties are lightly aromatic varieties. What Jancis Robinson describes as aromatically discrete include Pinot Blanc, again an offspring or a mutation of Pinot Gris, which itself is a mutation of Pinot Noir. Chenin Blanc, a Loire Valley high acid, lightly aromatic, and age-worthy, maybe perhaps similar to Riesling in terms of its positive attributes from the Loire Valley. Semillon, we talked about with Bordeaux, is a fairly new non-aromatic but age-worthy wine and great and lends well to botrytis, being botrytis affected. Trebbiano is Italy's most planted white grape variety, fairly quite neutral and light in all senses there, and also for those reasons grown largely in Cognac as well as mainly in Armagnac for production of those brandies, grape brandies. And lastly, Albarino is a Spanish grape variety from Rías Baixas in northwestern Spain, and kind of the green part of there, and producing some very flavorful, lightly aromatic, food-friendly, especially seafood pairing wines. For other red grape varieties, I split into light or medium-bodied varieties, almost in ascending order, going down the list here, and then fuller bodied. So light bodied include Gamay, which is about the lightest bodied red grape variety, as well Cabernet Franc, produced predominantly in the Loire Valley, but some excellent Cabernet Franc from Ontario, Virginia. And typically it gets blended into Bordeaux blends or Meritage blends with Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or other Bordeaux grape varieties. Tempranillo is Rioja's famous grape from northern Spain, producing phenomenal age-worthy, good value wines. If you're looking for an aged wine at an accessible price, Rioja, based on Tempranillo, tends to be the go-to region for that. Sangiovese is Italy's largest planted grape variety, and of course makes wines like Chianti, Chianti Classico, Brunello, etc. Super Tuscans are often Sangiovese based or blended. And Pinotage is an interesting variety, predominantly grown and bred in South Africa. One of its parents was Pinot Noir, and the other was Saint-Sault, spelled Saint-Sault. And Saint-Sault at the time was known as Hermitage because it was a Rhone variety, very close to the hill of Hermitage where we learned with Syrah. And even though it's not Syrah, it's a grape variety Saint-So, they called it Hermitage. So Pinot Noir and Hermitage or Saint-So gave you Pinotage, and a very polarizing grape variety. Some people love it, everybody else hates it, and it's very easy to have an opinion about Pinotage, which I really love, and kind of am always cheering for a good example of Pinotage, which there are some. In the fuller camp, we have Carmenere, a Bordeaux grape variety, same as Malbec. Of course, Carmenere is Chile's go-to grape variety, producing ripe-style wines. Malbec, the same thing, but over the border in Argentina. We'll cover that in week 4. Nebbiolo is a beautiful, complex, ethereal wine produced in Piemonte in northwestern Italy, in the foothills of the Alps. Zinfandel, a red, known for white Zinfandel, perhaps, which is a fairly neutral, light-bodied, medium-sweet rosé wine from California. But its red wines are its best expressions, where it's rich and full-bodied, raisiny, jammy, etc., and quite hedonistic. And Grenache, to some extent, quite the same, full-bodied Mediterranean plant, also grown by the Rhone Rangers in California, as well as GSMs in Australia, producing some great full-bodied Grenache wines. So great. So pause it there. I hope that was an effective way to communicate today's class. If you have any questions, please do reach out by email. I'm always available. My contact is malcolm@analogize.ca. No? malcolm@analogize.ca. Happy to reach out if you'd like to go over today's class. You should have access. I'll send a message to let you know once it's loaded up, which obviously you've already seen. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you can join us next week. Let me know if you're not available too, and the recordings would be available. But otherwise, hope to see you next week in class. And just do a quick recap. So a couple questions to consider. So one, what is a grape variety? So, of course, we talked at the beginning, a grape variety is a vine variety or a cultivar. It's a subspecies of Vitis vinifera. It includes grape varieties, examples like Riesling and Shiraz. I talked a little bit about Pinot Grigio being a red ribbon darling. What I meant by that was it's pretty much the second or one of the most planted that we don't really hear as much about from many countries, many wine regions. And so, what is Syrah's traditional region? Of course, that's Northern Rhone, such as Hermitage and Côte-Rôtie. And its modern region is Australia. And maybe modern is a little bit loosely defined there. It's been in Australia since the mid-19th century, but perhaps more modern than when first planted by the Romans in the Rhone Valley. I'm always interested in if you learned something and what you learned, what you enjoyed learning in our classes. If you do want to reach out to me and just send me a quick email or let me know next week in class, that would be much appreciated. Hope you're looking forward to next week's class. It's going to be a great class. Old world wine regions, really interesting, a lot of history, a lot of geography, very complex, can be daunting, be a little bit longer than the other of the 4 classes for our course. But hope you're looking forward to it. Hope you'll enjoy and hope you'll join us. And have a great week. And we'll see you soon. Thanks very much.